Hi, good evening. So as Laura mentioned in the announcements, and as I mentioned on the first Sunday and we talked about last week, this whole year we're exploring a theme together here at the center on Sundays and Wednesdays, as well as not only here at the center, but throughout the denomination. Over 125 centers of the 450 centers that we have are participating in this idea of sharing this common theme throughout the entire year, which is the global vision, a world that works for everyone. And each month has its own individual aspect of that global vision unfolding. And so this month is actually a world that works for everyone. And as you know, I prefer a world that works for all. So, in creating a world that works for all, Sharif Abdullah, who's the author of the book that we're also working with this month that will be in the bookstore, hopefully by the end of the month, but you can also purchase it online through Kindle at Amazon, but make sure you go to Smile Amazon. That way we still get something for it. It's a fabulous book. I highly recommend you get it, highly recommend you look at it. In this book, he talks about stories. And he talks about a new and emerging story. And so that is the talk title for this evening. And the presentation that I want to share with you is about that emerging story, that story that we were talking about the first Sunday, the story that Laura was talking about last week, and Reverend Doug continued with this week, and here we are again. So it's this emerging story. So he talks about three stories. The first story is the original story, and the original story is the story of the keepers. The second story is the dominant story, which is the story of the breakers. And then there's the emerging story, and the emerging story is the story of the menders. And as we go through these three stories tonight, you'll see which ones we fall into as Centers for Spiritual Living. You'll see patterns within ourselves of probably each one of the stories and where we're headed and what our call to action is. And Sharif Abdullah definitely calls us to action. Ernest Holmes calls us to action. In July of 1955, in July of 1955, there we go, the Science of Mind magazine, there was an article that he wrote that says, world peace is not an illusion, that it is possible. But in that article, he was very frank about what was going on in the world. He was looking at it dead on, what was going on in the world. He wasn't doing spiritual bypass. He wasn't like saying, no, I'm ignoring everything that's going on in the world and I'm staying here in truth. Instead, he turned and he looked at it and he faced it. And he mentioned it and he brought forth some of the things that were going on in the world. And it's amazing that those things are still going on in the world 60 years later. So he actually calls us in that article to step forward, yes, do our spiritual practice, because that is where it all starts, as I talked about before. It all starts within us. That's where it is. The work starts here. But we can't just stay here. We have to open out a way for the imprisoned splendor to escape, as Emerson says. So we have to open out a way and step into that which we are being called to do. And it doesn't have to be magnanimous and think about it on a global scale. We've heard about think globally, act locally. Well, that's what we're being asked to do now in Science of Mind, in Centers for Spiritual Living. Yes, we turn within, yes, we go within, but then when we have whatever it is that's been revealed to us, we take action upon that. It's not coming from the head, it's coming from the heart. It's coming from the Spirit. And so I'd like to go over some of the stories that Sharif Abdullah talks about, and then we're going to explore how our individual stories can lead us into a call to action to motivate and encourage others to join us as we together, collectively, co-creatively, create a world that works for all. So the first story is the story of the keepers. There we go. So, we are keepers. We live our lives in harmony with all our relations. We act out of the belief that the world was not created for any one species. We live here, but we don't try to control life. We keep to the ways that work. We keepers have been devastated by the breakers. For thousands of years, the breakers have killed us, dishonored our ancestors, destroyed our food, ruined our magic, forced us to their ways. The breakers have been at war with the earth, and we've all suffered for it. The breakers call us by many names, most of them bad: primitives, savages, natives, aborigines, heathens, pagans, the uncivilized. Despite this history, we hope that our brothers and sisters who are breakers will change their ways and come into balance with the earth and with each other and with us. So the story of the keepers is based on the thought that they live in harmony with all I encounter. Living in harmony with all I encounter is the basis of the thought. The assumption that the story is based upon is the land is abundant. The worldview is relational. Everything is in relationship to something else. It's completely relational. And then the ecology is very local. It's a very localized ecology living within a very small area. So these are the keepers. You'll notice that the majority of them are indigenous populations. The next story, we are the breakers. The earth and everything in it were created for man. We have the right and the responsibility to place all of it under our control. Because there is not enough for all, the world must be conquered in order for us to exist. We do not live in the web of life, we live on top of it. Our story is simple. Wildness is bad, human control is good. We call ourselves by many names, most of them positive or benign. Civilizers, settlers, pioneers, missionaries, explorers, and industrialists. We will continue to control and dominate all life forms, including humans who are not like us, because control is good. This is the dominant story that we live in this society. The breaker story. This is the one that's predominantly throughout the world, is the breaker story. The breaker story is based on these things. The thought that I am separate, the assumption that there is not enough. The worldview is objective, meaning everything is an object to be used, abused, manipulated for my own good. Everything is an object. And the ecology, make it work for me. I'll build a city in the desert where there is no water and bring water in and create palm trees and an oasis and agriculture, and we'll call it Las Vegas. Fun. So this is the breakers. These are the breakers. The third story, the emergent story, the menders. We are the menders. We believe the earth and our fellow humans need to be healed from the excesses of exclusivity. And we live our lives daily in accordance with this belief. We used to be breakers, but we are consciously turning away from the dead-end path, away from the glitter and the allure of the breaker society. Our goal is to live as consciously integral part of a living, conscious, and sacred planet. To catalyze a new era, the Mender era. Our task is simple and profound: to heal the damage caused by the breakers, those who act as though the earth and all her inhabitants were their property. We vow to stop breaker destruction and begin to restore the balance between the earth and humanity within this generation. We menders are breakers in recovery. Breaker history is our history. We're not arrogant enough to think that our problems were built by somebody else. We could be thought of as tempered breakers, or breakers with a goal of wholeness, healing, and connection. As the pioneers of a new society, the menders are conscious of the global nature of their oneness. Menders seek out opportunities to practice interconnection and interdependence with other beings. At the same time, we are aware of situations where it is advantageous to think and act in an objective fashion. We consciously reject all privileges that have come to us from the expense of others' lives, freedom, or comfort. The Mender story is in harmony with an ancient story, one as old as the earth itself. We honor the keepers who show us the way of wisdom, but we also honor the breakers who show us the way of technology. We heal the damage. We recognize that living in this world is a sacred act. We behave in ways that heal and restore balance in our lives, in our communities, and in the world. Menders live with wisdom. Menders practice inclusivity. Menders think holistically. And we are menders. So you should see quite a few faces that you recognize up there. The big one right there on this side here, our beloved Ernest, the mender. There's Dr. Ken and Dr. Kathy. Up in the far upper corner is Valerie Kaur. She's a Sikh woman who spoke at the Parliament of World Religions, whose process we're going to do in a few minutes about creating a story of change. And then down here, just below our logo, Center for Spiritual Living, that gentleman right there is Sharif Abdullah, the one who wrote Creating a World That Works for All. So the story here is based on the thought that we are one. We've heard this before. This is what Science of Mind teaches. This is what New Thought teaches. This is what we affirm all the time. God is all there is, and we are all one. The assumption, there is enough for all. I live in an abundant universe. The worldview is relational and objective. We have the opportunity to see the interconnectedness and the interrelatedness of all life, recognizing that I am you and you are me and we are one. That I am one with the tree and the sky and the birds and, yes, even the cockroaches and Suzanne the pigeons. But then there's also the opportunity to be objective, to be able to see things from a clearer, non-biased perspective. And then the ecology that the Menders work with, that the Mender idea works with, is it's a global ecology. We see the global as a whole, and we look at the interconnectedness and the interconnected web of life. That is the whole and the entirety. So we see things holistically rather than in parts, as do the breakers. The breaker society really took hold many years ago, but it really got going with Descartes and the Cartesian idea of the world or the universe operates as a machine with bits and pieces to be taken apart, analyzed, and looked at. So the Menders are coming back to the idea of the keepers, of a more holistic, more relational idea, while still looking at the advances of the technology from the breakers. So it's a both and. And so it's an interconnected global web of life rather than complete separation. So the Menders, we've talked about it for a couple weeks now. The Menders have three major practices. Menders practice enoughness, Menders practice inclusive compassion, and Menders practice relationship, reconnecting to relationships. And so this is how we begin to craft a story when we operate from this idea of what the Menders are here and doing, and that interconnectedness, that we are all one, that there is enough, that I practice compassion, that I reconnect with not only myself, but another, and with spirit, and with time, and with place. That reconnection is really what helps form that bond. And as I look at my own story, I recognize that my story is the story of others as well. That we have a common story, we share a story. And from this story, then we can step forth and use that story, the new story, the emerging story, the story of love, the story of compassion, to change the global story to one that is a global story, a global working, the world that works for all. So what makes a successful story? There are 7 elements, according to Sharif Abdullah, that make a successful story. The first is the successful story must be inclusive. It must be authentic. It must be spiritual. Because without recognizing the transcendent, it falls flat. There is no, all of these components are necessary for success. Keeping in mind that the Breaker Society has really pulled spirit away from who we are and why we're here. It must be scapegoat-free. In other words, we can't blame anybody for anything. We have to accept full responsibility for everything. It must be sustainable. It must be positive, creative, and adaptive, because it is an emerging thing, it is an evolving thing. Remember, we are open at the top, the V that you see coming down, spirit into form, form returning to spirit. It's open at the top. And it must be practical, and it must be implementable. It just can't be some pie in the sky. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if we all had lived in a world that worked for all, worked for everyone? There has to be a practical, implementable idea. So Sharif Abdullah goes on to say, the most effective way to promote change is to show a person that is in their own self-interest. What catalyzes deep change is an appeal to the heart. Compassion has been the most potent force for positive change. People move when they are reminded of their highest values and ideas, and when they see those values embodied in authentic leaders. And he's calling, and I'm calling, and Centers for Spiritual Living is calling, that each of us step into that role of authentic leader in creating a world that works for all. Embodying those highest values, embodying those highest ideas, and really stepping into it. We each have something to offer. He also says that the fastest way to change society, or the fastest way to usher in this new idea, this new era of the Mender era, is to change the story. And so we do that, like I said, by changing our own stories. And there's a wonderful man named Marshall Ganz who wrote a great article of why stories are important. And I'd like to share with you what he's written here, and then we are going to go into a process together that Valerie Kaur created based on his work, Marshall Ganz' work. Marshall Ganz is a organizer. He is a social activist, and he worked on the 2008 presidential campaign for Barack Obama. So he was able to look at, so he writes about why stories are important and changing the narrative that we see, that we experience, that we live on a daily basis. So here's some of what he has to say. Walter Brueggemann writes in The Prophetic Imagination about the 2 elements of prophetic vision. One is criticality, which is the recognition of the world's pain. Second is hope, which is the recognition of the world's possibilities. It is that combination of the critical eye and the hopeful heart that brings about change. Looking at it, and then looking at it with compassion and bringing change. Hope is not only audacious, it is substantial. Hope is what allows us to deal with problems creatively. In order to deal with fear, we have to mobilize hope. Hope is one of the most precious gifts that we can give each other and the people we work with to make the change. The way we talk about this is not just to go up to someone and say, hey, be hopeful. We just don't talk about hope and other values and abstractions. We talk about them in the language of stories, because stories are what enable us to communicate those values to one another. In a story, a challenge presents itself to the protagonist, who then has a choice. And then an outcome occurs. The outcome teaches a moral, but because the protagonist is a human-like character, we're able to identify empathetically, and therefore we're able to feel, not just understand what's going on. And because we can feel it, we get the moral not just as a concept, but as a teaching of our hearts. We embody it because it's a story. It touches our heart somehow. That's the power of the story. That's why most of the world's faith traditions interpret themselves as stories, because they're teaching our hearts how to live as choiceful human beings capable of embracing hope over fear, self-worth and self-love over self-doubt, and love over isolation and alienation. We all have a story of self. All of us do. We all have a story of self. And what is unique about each of us are not the categories that we belong to, the labels that we place on ourselves. What's utterly unique to us is our own journey of learning to be a full human being, a faithful person. And those journeys are never easy. They have their challenges, their obstacles, their crises. We learn to overcome them, and because of that, we have lessons to teach. In a sense, all of us walk around with a text from which to teach, and that text is our own lives. There's another story, which is the story of us, the second story. That's an answer to the question, why are we called? What experiences and values do we share as a community that call us to what we are called to? What is it about our experience of faith, of public life, the pain in the world, and the hopefulness of the world? It's putting what we share into words. We've all been in places where people who've worked together for years, but there's no us there because they never share their story. Faith traditions are grand stories for us because they teach us how to be an us. And finally, there's the story of now, the fierce urgency of now. The story of now is realizing that after sharing our values and our aspirations, that the world out there is not necessarily what we think it should be. Instead, it just is as it is. And that's a challenge for us. And we need to appreciate the challenge and the conflict, because the values by which we wish the world lived and the values by which it actually does are in conflict. The difference between these two creates a tension, and it forces us to consider choice. What do we do about that? We're called to answer that question, but we're called to answer it in the spirit of hope. Our goal is to meet the challenge, to seize this hope, to turn it into concrete action. After developing the stories of self, then we develop the stories of us by building relationships. And then we turn to strategizing and actions, working together to achieve a common purpose, learning to experience hope. Work together to achieve a common purpose, learning to experience hope. And that's the story of now. That's the story of change. So even in this, you hear the enoughness, the compassion, as well as the relationship. Working together, we co-create a world that works for all. So I invite you to go ahead and take out your, there's a piece of paper that you were given that says the story of change at the top of the page there. And you'll need a pen for it. And Joe, you might want to give us a little bit more light. So I want you just to close your eyes for a moment, if you're comfortable doing so. And just go ahead and scan over your life and see where there might have been a challenge. It doesn't have to be a huge challenge. It doesn't have to be a life-shaking challenge, an earth-shattering challenge, but a challenge. If you want to work with something big, great. If you want to work with something small, great. Whatever's comfortable for you. But where you have experienced a challenge, just notice where you've experienced a challenge. And then notice the choice that you made as you're experiencing that challenge. And as a result of that, what did you learn in that situation? Okay, so I invite you to go ahead and open your eyes. And this is your story of self. Go ahead and take note of that. Number one is, I faced X challenge. I faced this challenge. Number two is, I could have X, but instead I Y. I could have done this, but instead I did that. And what I learned is, or what I learned. So I'm going to share with you an example as we go through this process here. I was talking with my sister about this whole thing earlier today, and I was talking to her about the story and the story of change. And so we came upon one that really worked for her, and she shared it, and she said it was okay for me to share it with you here. So for the example here, for her, it was, I faced some hardship. I faced some financial hardship. I'm a working mom, but I want to homeschool my kids, and I really didn't know how I would be able to balance all of that. That was the hardship. That was the challenge I was facing. We needed money coming in. I really didn't want to go back to work, but we needed money coming in, and I've got the kids at home. So that was the face. That was the challenge. So I could have gone back to work. Not ideal, but we were needing the money. Not ideal. I could have gone back to work. But instead, I created my own business online. So then what I learned from that is that I have the skills and the talents and the resources already within me to do something creative, fun, that allows me to work from home, that allows me to be with the kids, and yet meet financial goals and financial needs, the financial strategies of the family. And the idea that I came up with was that with the homeschooling of the kids, I found that there wasn't enough, or there wasn't really any curriculum that taught kids financial literacy. So I wrote the curriculum for financial literacy. So that's her story of self. Okay? So moving forward then is the story of us. The story of us is the collective story, the we story. It is what's emerging as the Mender story. But this is the story of us. So how does my story then become, my story is the story of all blank because something. So with this story, you have to know who your audience is. if I were talking to a bunch of children, me saying that, or my sister creating this work, wouldn't fall where it would if the target audience then is actually moms who are wanting to stay at home but who are looking to work from home. Right? Does that make sense? So for Michelle, her story is, my story is the story of all moms who would like to stay at home with their kids but who would also like to have a career. Because what did she say? Because all of us are looking for an alternative. And not only is my story the story of moms wanting to stay home, looking to do something different, my story is the story of anybody who's wanting not to have to go to work, but actually work from home and find something new and different. So see how her story then became the story of all? She knew her target audience, who she was talking to, the target audience. So who's your target audience, and how does your story become the story of all? So go ahead and fill that part out. And then there's the story of now. Now we have the opportunity like never before to blank because blank. So this is that story of urgency, that story of now, the story of action. So in this case, for Michelle, now we have the opportunity to, like never before, to build a business online and to become an entrepreneur because we have this wonderful technology called the internet and social media, websites, and Zoom meetings. We have this wonderful technology to be able to do this, to work from home, to work in my pajamas, to write with a crayon because it's the only thing I can pull out of my purse at the moment, in her case. Right? So we have that opportunity now like never before. So what is your opportunity now like never before? Because, there you go. Fill that in. And then step number 6 of creating a story of change. The first step is. So the first step is actionable. It's got a time on it. It's got action on it. It's a real live thing. It's not just some airy-fairy thing. It's got to be actionable. Remember, implementable, right? Practical and implementable. So for Michelle, what Michelle would tell you is, the first step is going to one of my 2 websites. The first step is either going to mamameansbusiness.com and see how I can help you as an entrepreneur, as a woman, or as anybody wanting to be an entrepreneur from home, working online. Go to that website, mamameansbusiness.com, or if you're interested in the curriculum for financial literacy for the kids, go to busykids.org. busykidsclub.com. Busy, B-I-Z-Z-Y as in business, busykidsclub.com. So those are her first steps. It's a call to action. And you can do that right now. Go there now. Just like, all those fun infomercials, right? Do this now. Call now, right? And you'll get. It's that same kind of idea, this call to action. So what is your first step? What are you asking somebody to do? What is your first step? So I invite you now to go ahead and turn to somebody sitting next to you and just read your 6 sentences. That's all you're doing, reading the 6 sentences. No other backstory, no other blah, blah, blah. Just read your 6 sentences to the person sitting next to you. Yeah, please. Just a little bit, Joe. Can we have the lights up just a little bit more, please? There you go. Thank you. Just 6 sentences and then switch. You're reading them aloud to each other to bring voice to the room, to make them come alive. You're telling your story of change. Okay. Let's come back together here. Know that you'll have ample time to share your stories with one another. So here's a story. So, when I moved to Las Vegas, I moved here with my ex, and then we split up in 2008, and I was alone and petrified, feeling so scared, I thought I would die. That's somebody else's story, not mine. Anyway, in 2008, I did find myself alone here in Las Vegas, and I was feeling really lonely and really kind of at a loss and very disconnected. And I could have gone back to Seattle, because what I was missing is I was missing my community of people, my spiritual community. I could have gone back to Seattle, but what I did instead is I stayed here. I took the step and I stayed here, and what I did is I knew that I needed to feel connected, and the way I wanted to feel connected was get involved in the spiritual community. And I knew that I loved to study, and so what I did is I took a class. In 2009, in January of 2009, I took the Journey Inwards class, which is Colleen's class that's being offered soon, next week. And so I took that class. And what I learned that I wasn't feeling disconnected from my community so much as I was feeling disconnected from myself. And I was feeling disconnected from God, from Spirit. And yes, I was feeling disconnected from my beloved community. I couldn't put 5 people together to have a dinner party back in 2008. And my story is the story of every spiritual seeker, of everyone who's looking for that connection to Spirit or that connection to community. Because each one of us really is looking for conscious union with the One, conscious union with God. That's really what we're seeking. We're not seeking something else. We're really seeking that deep spiritual connection that so often comes when we're together, where 2 or more are gathered. And so my story is that story. It's the story of all of us sitting in this room. That's our story. We're here because we're seeking community of some sort. And so now we have the opportunity like never before to take a class, to get connected, because classes start next week right here at the center. Classes start next week right here at the center. We have Beyond Limits starting on Wednesday mornings. Beyond Limits is that first introductory class that teaches you all about science of mind. We have Roots, which teaches you all about the history of new thought from ancient Egypt all the way up to present day. We have From Awakening to Freedom, which is exploring the untethered soul, the book, The Untethered Soul, and that little voice, our inner roommate who likes to talk to us and chatter and keep us busy and occupied. That starts on Tuesdays. And then on Thursdays, we have the Journey Inwards, which is the journal writing class that takes us deeper into ourselves and it allows us really to communicate with ourselves. And in each one of these classes, we have the opportunity to experience not only connection with ourselves and connection with our spirit, but connection with each other, to get involved, to be a part of community. And so the first step is to march your fanny out that door, make a right, and then there is the education table right there. There are all the sheets right there to sign up. Pick up a sheet, sign up for any one of those classes. Is Roots also non-certificated? Or it's certificate? Okay, straight certificated. Okay. So if you've never had a class here at the center, you have 3 classes available to you. If you've had a class at the center here, you have 4 classes available to you. There is no excuse. There's payment plans, etc. So right after service, go sign up for a class. That's the call to action there. Let's pray. And then you pay for it in the bookstore. And shop. Let's pray. So I recognize that here and now there is just this one life, this one presence. This one eternal beingness that was there in the beginning and will always be there. For it has no beginning and it has no end. It simply is. It is the isness that is the allness that is the fullness. And it is absolutely perfect. It is absolutely whole. It is absolutely complete unto itself. And it is forever unfolding in divine right order and divine right action. And so I know that all that is occurring, all that is manifest, all that is being called forth is an expression of the divine, right here and right now. Through each one gathered here today, each one says yes to that inner call. Each one says yes to that next action. Recognizing that it is the Spirit within that does the work, it is the Spirit within that calls, and it is the Spirit within that moves forth and goes forth, preparing the way, making their crooked places straight. And so there is no other. There is nothing that is separate from the one. There is only the one. So there cannot be an other. For there is only one. God is all that there is, and what God did not make was not made. So I recognize that no matter what is going on in the world right now, through the world of effect, through the world of appearances, that behind all of that is love, is peace, is joy, is harmony. And we are the places where God shows up. So we are the places where love and joy and harmony and peace must show up. And we must do it within our own selves. We must turn within and allow it to express through us. That is our internal work. And the outer work follows. And we say yes to that which we are called to do. We are saying yes to the expression of love, yes to our expression of joy, yes to our expression of harmony, yes to our expression of peace. And in shining our light, we call others to us. And we encourage them to shine their light brightly and greatly. And together we do amazing things. Because it is God, as me, as each person here, as everyone in part of Centers for Spiritual Living, you thought